Yeah, my name's Dave CORTESE, and I'm a member of the California State Senate. In the 15th District, I'm elected from the San Jose area, which is billed as the capital of Silicon Valley. And I've been an elected official at one level or another here, municipal, county, state, for a number of years now, going back to the early 1990s, actually. I mean, in the most basic terms, a friend of mine, a professional friend of mine, came to me, Julia came to me and said, I want you to meet with the CEO of the Foundation for Climate Restoration at a time when I was president of the Board of Supervisors in Santa Clara County. And I did. I invited and welcomed that meeting. And it wasn't a lengthy meeting, but basically the ask was that we adopt here in Silicon Valley the first ever climate restoration declaration of emergency, which would be in resolution form, voted on and made official by the government. And in effect, it would become a template for other leaders and other governments, not just here in the United States, but around the world, to try to build some momentum that really wasn't occurring at the time. This was in 2019, and there really wasn't momentum around climate restoration in the political sense in 2019 in this country. So we began, it wasn't a grassroots movement, but a grass tops movement in the sense of getting major metropolitan areas and local governments involved.
What was, if you can just give me the high points of, what was the pitch that Rick came to you with?
Rick was pretty humble about the whole thing for somebody in such a significant position. He had these ties to the United Nations and really connected to, I thought, the way it was explained, very much connected to what the UN does in terms of its climate summit and continues to do. But at the same time, he said, look, I don't know a lot about how to get things done in big local governments, in these big provinces, if you will, that we have here in America. How do you do that? I explained it to him pretty quickly. I think he was a little surprised that we could move so quickly, because when you think about Congress or even the state legislature, things move slowly. And one of the benefits of moving things county by county or city by city is speed. And when he realized that, he said, he asked me, he said, when do you think you could get this done, this resolution, this declaration? And I said, well, we have a July recess. This was June. We have a July recess. As soon as we come back in August, let's move it forward. Let's get it done. And I think that was an eye-opener for him. I think in its own way, it helped the movement because, it helped folks at the foundation understand that this is a way to move things quickly in a situation that's, frankly, as we all know, existential and urgent.
I'm going to go back to the core elements of that, but just in terms of process, if you could just, as you articulated just before, at a federal level you were in a very different situation, but at a local level you were able to kind of swim against that tide.
Yeah, at a national level, the national administration at the time in 2019 was, pulling out of Paris. It was pulling out of the climate movement in a very methodical way. And of course, that would be frustrating to anybody who was trying to go the other direction and move toward climate restoration as quickly as possible. Again, think of the government that I was leading at the time at the county level. There's only 58 counties in California, and I was leading the government of the third largest county in the state, an $8 billion economy. And all of a sudden, I think, light bulbs went on. If we can get an $8 billion economy, an economy that has one of the largest GDPs in the world, even among countries, to declare through its political leadership in a parliamentary way that climate restoration is critical, that should give us some traction moving forward. And that's the tack we took.
Can I just, so we talked about process. Can you just tell me what Rick explained to you in terms of the actual act? Like, this is climate restoration, This is what we're looking for. How do you transpose that into something?
Well, you know, he talked about the fact that folks had done climate emergency resolutions or declarations. In fact, those at the time were almost becoming passé, I would say. And I don't mean it because a climate resolution is at all bad, but these resolutions weren't getting to the heart of the matter, which is carbon reduction, which is reducing carbon in the atmosphere back to levels where humanity and the planet can be sustained. And that's what it was really all about. And again, you know, put in those terms, how profound it is to think about not just the issue of we have an emergency to save the planet, but if we don't commit to climate restoration, we're not going to be able to save humanity. That was really what was compelling to me.
Okay. And he suggested to you that there was ways of achieving, there's a number of ways, but in particular the interest of climate restoration was around the idea of carbon capture through building materials.
Yeah, shortly thereafter, let me start over. Shortly thereafter, I was invited on the eve of the United Nations Climate Summit to speak at the United Nations on behalf of the Foundation for Climate Restoration, and I was the only elected official at all who was invited to speak there. And that was interesting for me in terms of the question, how are we going to do this? Because it wasn't all about elected officials. It was about, this is a piece of it. We need these local governments and elected officials to come along. But we need religious institutions and the major traditions of the world to come along. So there were representatives from there. There was a papal representative. We need Silicon Valley in the sense of technology to come along. And there were organizations there like Blue Planet. And you really got the feeling, and I think it was very compelling, that it's going to take one town, one city, one province at a time, but it's also going to take technology. And technology alone won't be the silver bullet. Carbon capture, building materials that are carbon negative, you name it. I mean, basically, people were pushing all the chips to the center of the table and saying, we need all these things. We need both and. Actually, we need many and let's do it all as long as it's within our values. And I thought that was just a terrific way to further jumpstart the movement.
Just your thoughts on this comment that, you know, if your house catches fire and you call the fire brigade and they arrive and then they start negotiating, that's not really a good way to do it. And it just seems that with things like the Paris Accord and the IRA and stuff like that, that there's so much negotiation and compromise around that for reasons we all understand, but nonetheless it's just diluting things. And you've managed to do something at a local level that is astounding compared to that. I don't know what my question is, but
yeah, it's been an interesting ride for me since 2019 in terms of insight into the frustrations that occur along the way, even in a state like California, where here in 2019, this big county, Santa Clara County in Silicon Valley, steps right in and without editing, without compromise or dilution, adopts this resolution on climate restoration. And then I go to state government, I'm a state senator now, and you see that folks are arguing about things that are actually holding us up. Good people who are on the right side of the issue, who will be on the right side of history ultimately, I think are fighting too much about issues that frankly are going to slow us down. And this is not an issue where we can afford to slow down. And we got to get beyond that. I'm proud to say most recently in the California legislature, major progress was made. But let me tell you, it is hand-to-hand combat to get that done.
Going to start. Can you move on and talk a little bit about 1297, the bill, what it consists of?
Well, Senate Bill 1297 was and is an attempt to move the state, both private sector and public sector. So when I say the state, I don't just mean state buildings or state roads or highways or anything like that. I'm talking about everybody in the state needs to move toward carbon negative building materials. And the California Energy Commission and Community and Housing Community Development Commission, all those agencies in the state need to adopt and promulgate rules that require carbon negative building materials so that, again, that tool isn't left on the sideline. That's what the bill's about. It's pretty simple and pretty straightforward. And again, it's that kind of legislation that needs to move quickly, and we shouldn't be arguing about the minutia.
That bill passed, correct?
That bill will be introduced in January. Again, the bill did not pass, actually. The bill passed committees all the way through, and then ultimately died on the Assembly floor, in the other house, not the Senate floor.
What do you think it's going to take to get it through?
1 more year. I think in 1 more year we'll have it done. It should have been included as part of this year's climate package, which was pretty robust. It was a great year for climate legislation. It wasn't, but it wasn't because of policy issues. We actually managed to bring that bill along with trade union support and building industry support, which is unheard of because the two are typically at odds. People are nervous. You know, they don't want carbon negative building materials to cost jobs. They don't want it to cause construction defects or other problems if you're on the industry side. So we tailored that bill so that all of those caveats were handled. Sometimes in the legislature, when there's 3,000 bills moving along, something will die, without policy reasons. It's just because somebody's trying to give a haircut to the overall bill load, and that does happen. And again, we need to make sure when it comes to good climate legislation that it's not treated that way. This isn't like whether or not we should fund, more routine infrastructure in the state. This is very much urgent, very much existential, and I think probably most listeners would agree with that. But the legislature has to behave that way day in and day out.
Just for a separate soundbite, it seems repetitious, but I just want to take this on its own, and that is that the traditional reasons that people would object to this are kind of melting away now because of technology and people like Blue Planet that are actually providing things that have a solution. So maybe that level of resistance is starting to dissolve.
Yeah, I do think that resistance is starting to dissolve. People are, again, at least over the last few months in California, starting to put aside their differences about technical issues and methodology and things like that, and just getting things moved forward. You can always come back with another bill the next year and tweak things if it's not exactly right. And that's the attitude that we have to have around climate. We got to get what is good, what's 95% correct or accurate by any account. Even opposition sometimes says you're 90% there, it's the last 10% we're worried about. Well, let's move it forward and let's work on the last 10% next year. That's what we have to do. Let's, the old saying, if on this climate legislation, if you're letting the perfect get in the way of the good, it's going to be problematic for humanity.
Yeah. Well, it's refreshing to hear that you know that no means maybe.
Yes, yeah.
Can you talk not as Senator Dave Cortese, but just as Dave personally about how you see where we are, how you chart the future and the future for your children and grandkids? Or what keeps you up at night, or what lets you sleep?
What keeps me up at night these days is the fact that California, I think, is such a microcosm for what's going on in the world in so many ways, both politically but also in terms of the symptoms and the residual effects of this climate emergency, this climate restoration emergency. And it's not just an issue of, oh, how sad, there's fires like we've never seen before. How devastating, how devastating, there's fish dying all over the place because of of climate change, of sea level rise, of temperature change. These are tragic things that we can feel sad about, but it's also perilously close to being overwhelming for all of us, for people who live in their neighborhoods and go to work every day. The working stiff, as I would say, and I mean that in a good way, the person who has an ordinary job and is just trying to survive is wondering, there's 6 different crises going on right now, catastrophic stuff is going on all around me. It's related to climate change. Do I give up? Do I give up? You know, we've seen even in single disasters, Katrina, you know, hurricanes, whatever, not everyone is equally resilient. And that's what keeps me up at night. I feel like I want my neighbors, I want my children, I want my grandchildren to keep fighting and not give up and know that there's hope. You know, once you lose hope, that's when you really lose humanity. And we've just got to make sure we don't lose hope. I am a hopeful person. I'm a hopeful person even, you know, in the face of the greatest tragedy, whether it's, you know, climate work or whether it's criminal justice reform or whether it's some other thing that I work on. Sometimes it's too easy to say that this is an intractable problem and walk away or just go work on something else. We can't do that. You know, to paraphrase John F. Kennedy, we do these things because they're hard. And we don't do them just because they're hard. It's because the hard things are the things that we need to do to maintain hope. And, you know, that's what I believe in. Hope is fundamental to the situation that we're in. I think, you know, as a world community right now, we need it across the board. And you certainly need it to win these short-term victories.